Games and story, I think, have a very interesting relationship with each other. And, I see a lot of game designers that really are aspiring to be storytellers. And I've always thought that the coolest stories are always coming from the players. I mean, it's nice to have a backstory or here's the world and all that. But really, what you want every player to basically encounter their own story, create their own story by what they do in the game. That's the really interesting story for me. But as creatures, as organisms, we are faced with this kind of fundamental dilemma, which is that, we're here, the world's out there. Basically, we have a limited bubble of experience, things that we, know about the world, will experience directly about the world. Basically, we take this in through our senses. We see the world, we perceive it in certain ways. It goes into our imagination. We actually start building little models of it. And, based upon how we interpret the world around us, it influences our behavior. How we act out there. Now, that limited bubble of experience is not really enough for us to build very effective models of the world. And it's that experience that we're building these models of the world from. So over time, actually through evolution, I think we've discovered two other methods. One is to have toy experiences where we have symbolic experiences, and kind of abstract that back into the real world. The other one is to learn from other people's experiences. If my friend the caveman comes back and says, a tiger almost ate me when I left the cave, I didn't have that experience, but I know the next time I leave the cave, I'm going to look out for a tiger. I was able to learn from his experience without having that experience directly myself. Now, over time, through our culture, we've come to call one of these things play, these toy experiences, and the other one's story. These are both, though, fundamentally educational technologies. I think this is why we enjoy consuming these things, because they actually help us build more elaborate, more detailed world models with a limited experience base. Now, story and play, I think, have a really kind of interesting two sides of a coin relationship here. Some of the really cool stories, the ones that really capture your imagination, you can deconstruct into characters, worlds, locations, objects. I watch my 8-year-old playing, with Star Wars Legos, and he creates his own stories with the stormtroopers and all the components from Star Wars, and he kind of understands that universe, but now becomes kind of a set of things for him to play with. I think some of the best games where players have a lot of freedom, creativity, lead to really cool stories. The games are actually generating stories as the players play. So in some sense, I think, really good stories can generate play, and really good play can generate stories. So I think the two are kind of self-supporting, but they're very, very different, actually. A lot of times you hear that, stories have such a deep emotional connection, whereas games are flat. I don't really think that's true. I think the games really, haven't matured as much. But I think what it is that they have very different emotional palettes. The emotional palette of film is totally based upon empathy. You can look at characters, these actually simulations on the screen, which we call actors, pretending to be these characters, and they're basically pretending to have emotions, and we're empathizing with those emotions. And so when they feel sad, we, feel that sadness. When they're happy, we feel happy. Games, the emotional palette is based upon agency. The fact that I did it, that I'm responsible, I have accountability, I'm the one that pushed the joystick in that direction. So I think that the kind of emotions that we can actually get out of games are very different. Things like guilt, pride, accomplishment, teamwork are things I've felt in gaming I've never felt in linear media, because they were things that I was actively involved with. I remember when I played Black and White the first time, and you have this creature you're doing, basically raising, and you can discipline it or reward it, and I just started slapping it to see what happened, and it got really downtrodden and sad and all that, and I actually felt so bad, even though I knew it was a digital character, but I felt so bad, and I felt guilty for having done that. There was a much earlier game called Choplifter, where you flew this little helicopter around. You were rescuing these little tiny people, which were really like 10 pixels high, and I'd pick them up with the helicopter and bringing them out. They'd get out after I rescued them. They'd jump out of the helicopter and wave at me, and I felt so proud. And it was 10 white pixels I'd rescued, But it was just funny that it was able to kind of tweak that circuit in my head, of feeling accomplishment and pride. And again, this is something I've never really felt, watching a movie. I felt indirectly, that a character in the movie felt proud or accomplished or guilty, but I didn't directly feel, I was responsible for it. So I think that is the primary distinguishing factor between the emotional palette and both. As we were getting closer to finishing the very first version of The Sims, we were of course bringing people in, watching them play it, just observing. And as designers, we were sitting back and watching them play the game. And as they were playing the game, they were telling each other the story of what was happening. And it was hilarious. I really enjoyed hearing the stories, and it was, based upon what was actually happening in the game, but they would elaborate, they would add details, and they gave it almost, themes. And it was just fascinating to me how readily people would build a story around this. I think it's a fundamental way for us to convey things to another person, is through story. And so we decided that, we should, at the very last minute, we decided we wanted to put a feature in so players could basically capture screenshots, write text, and basically build a little comic book, a little illustrated comic book, and then upload it with one click. They didn't have to know anything about the web. It was just built into the game. Capture a story, write it under the pictures, press a button, it goes on the web. And so we had, a section of our website with player stories, and it became immensely popular. And initially it was, kind of predictable, silly stories about superheroes or whatever. But very rapidly, we started seeing these very heartfelt, deep, real stories. There was one of the early ones was a woman who got out of an abusive relationship, and she was trying to tell that story to inspire other women in the same position. Other ones were, how this guy had a horrible senior year in high school. Some of these were just like almost rants. One was a rant about how they hated this one particular Starbucks in New York City because the homeless people would go in there and drink the cream. I mean, just weird things like that. It was amazing that these are people that probably never would have written these things down at all. They didn't really have a creative outlet, but once they started playing the game and they started actually kind of recreating these things, and they found how easy it was to share. And also these people would post these stories and other people would comment on them, rate them. And for all these people who have never once been told they were creative or done anything interesting, to just have 5 people, random people say that was really cool, made them tremendously motivated. And they would go back and do much more elaborate stories after that. It took very little positive reinforcement or recognition for these people then to dive in, and obviously these people, had things they wanted to express. So basically this game for them turned into a creative tool, a tool of self-expression. And so we later kind of developed that, in The Sims, where you're capturing movies and much more elaborate things. And of course, alongside of games, there's been this really interesting field of machinima, where people are actually using game engines to tell stories, very, very cheaply. And so that's something, for the same reason, has been growing up alongside of games and has turned into its own kind of whole medium.